college football prize picks show. I'm here today, and joined with me is Matt Gajewski, who is our college football lead analyst who does our projections and so much more for the site, one of the best in the business. But just so you guys know, this show is sponsored by PrizePicks, and if you don't know what PrizePicks is, it's basically a website where you make over/under picks on player props. You can do anywhere from 2 to 5 players, and basically, if you do a pick 5 and you get all 5 right, you'll 10x on your money. And if you use code Awesemo, we'll match up to your first $100 on your first deposit. It's a huge promo. It's great for everything. So, Matt, how are you doing? How was the wedding this past weekend?
The wedding was good, man, but I'm excited to have a little more freedom here. Some more time to sit down and take a look at some of these props and some of these games. So I'm excited, but also very happy that wedding season is behind me.
Hey man, don't worry. We'll get you a spring wedding where it's something that you can enjoy a little bit more. That's all. But before we get started, I'd like to welcome Kim, Tampa Bound, and Jared McDaniel to the Awesemo team. It's awesome that they're joining the channel. If you guys want to, it'd be fantastic. Subscribe, like, join in, and say those fun badges and everything, and all we have in store here. But getting into your first pick, Matt, this is actually one of my favorite players in the country. You're feeling the TreVeyon Henderson Ohio State over.
Man, this kid is so good. Freshman TreVeyon Henderson is just fully burst onto the scene. He's been limited a little bit early in his career. At first, he was splitting time with Mayan Williams and Master Teague. Then he rips off that 24 carry, 277-yard game against Tulsa. And then they face Akron Rutgers. He gets banged up a little bit, and then his workload's been limited for the couple weeks after that. But last week, we saw him get right back to that 20-plus carry workload. He handled 21 attempts for 152 yards against Penn State, so just extreme efficiency there as well. With Henderson this week, Nebraska's on deck, and Ohio State is still a 2-touchdown favorite here, maybe a little bit more depending on where you look. And Henderson, this efficiency not only translates against all defenses, we saw it against Penn State, who plays a very good defense, but Henderson now has Master Teague questionable for the game. Teague hasn't played in a couple weeks now, and Mayan Williams is basically an afterthought in the backfield. He only received 3 attempts in their last game. Just based on raw projections, median projections we have at Awesemo, he is way above 100 yards on this. We have him sitting right around 140. And if you even reduce his projection back to the timeshare status he had before, it's still a good bet towards the over here. So Henderson just not high enough. I know the number is high at 97.5, but that's still a number I'm looking towards the over on.
Yeah, I mean, I remember watching him in that first game against Minnesota and seeing like Mayan Williams lead the backfield and a Master T get a little worked in. And then once TreVeyon Henderson took over, the man ripped off a 60-yard touchdown. It's like, this guy is different. I watched his high school tape, and people in the dynasty community for NFL are talking about this guy for Devy, and just he's going to be one of those running backs that you'll know the name very, very well soon here enough. And he's got potential to break some records at Ohio State. But getting into our next pick, it's one of them that you don't have projections for because it's not on the main slate, but it's Deuce Vaughn over 104.5 rushing yards. I know the prop is a little high, but he's playing Kansas. They give up over 6 yards a carry. And the thing is Kansas has been fighting in some of these games, so I'm not sure he gets totally taken out of the game script and just benched because they're winning by so much, because Kansas has, again, fought with Oklahoma and some of these top tier teams. And Vaughn is someone who can break away a huge run on any single carry. The concern I have is, doing it through the air, but I'm just assuming that Kansas State will save some of those plays for another time and keep it on the ground, and he'll be able to hit this over 104 yards. How do you feel about it? I know you don't do projections for it, but running back over and rushing yards against Kansas just sounds right.
Yeah, I mean, I like this one. And I think we know what Kansas State wants to do. They like to be a run-first team, and they haven't always been able to this year because of negative game script, but they're still well below average in terms of pass rate. And Deuce Vaughn, he's the entire offense. Like, he's the engine of this offense. If they reach their implied team total, which is almost 40 points, you would think Deuce Vaughn has a lot to do with that. So I'm pretty comfortable with this one as well. I like the pick.
Yeah, I mean, again, as I said, Deuce Vaughn is just, if you haven't watched him play, he's like a Darren Sproles who also played at Kansas State, where he's just capable of breaking those monstrous runs. And this year, he's actually had 15 carries in majority of games or sorry, more in majority of games, even with these negative game scripts. So it's someone that I am looking forward to taking the over on. But let's get into your next pick, which is someone I had to look up his name because I did not even know what team he played for. So I'll let you say this one.
All right, we're in the weeds a little bit with Trey Siggers of SMU. So going into the year, he wasn't even considered the lead back. They have Ulysses Bentley, who's an explosive back himself, but he's injured. Ulysses Bentley has been in and out of games for the last 4 games now. Some he's played in, and each of the 2 times he's tried to play in the last 4 games, he's aggravated his injury. Last week, he aggravates the ankle, exits the game, and doesn't return. He's doubtful for this game here, and Trey Siggers is priced as if Bentley's playing. Then we look at the matchup. They're playing Memphis, who has a defense allowing over 160 rushing yards per game. This total is 70.5 points, which means there should be efficiency on both sides of the ball in a back and forth affair between SMU and Memphis here. If Siggers handles a larger workload because Bentley's out or Bentley's limited, he's going to crush this 61.5 rushing yard prop. So towards the over, I actually think I like this one a little more than Henderson. I know I listed the Ohio State TreVeyon Henderson first, but this Trey Siggers prop is just flat out too low.
Yeah, I mean, this weekend on PrizePicks, there's a lot of overs that we seem to be liking that we'll be getting to throughout the show. And I mean, I do agree. Once I found out that he was at SMU and he was the backup to Ulysses Bentley, that was the telltale sign. I'm like, okay, this is an AAC opponent, and he can easily hit that over. Memphis has been a little banged up on both sides of the ball. I believe their quarterback, I don't know if he's starting this weekend.
He's questionable.
Yeah, it's like I remember watching the UCF game thinking, okay, they're going to blow us out. And we somehow pulled that one out with our quarterback who doesn't throw it past 6 yards down the field. So I think this is definitely a good one that I will be taking a part of as well. But moving on to another over that I like, Breece Hall over 119 rushing yards. I know how high that prop is, but he is facing off against Texas, who's giving up 5.3 yards a carry. And you look at like some of the games that Texas has played the elite running backs. You have Zach Evans, who hit 113 yards on 15 carries. Kennedy Brooks, 217 on 25. Jaylen Warren, 193 on 33. Abram Smith, 145 yards on 21 carries this past weekend. Breece Hall is one of the best running backs in the country. He's had over 20 rushing attempts in 5 out of the last 7 games. I think they're going to lean heavy on him. And I think this is one of those games where the big stars are just going to show up.
I cross-referenced this with the projections just because, like, I saw the 119.5 rushing yards, and there's like a little bit of sticker shock. You're like, whoa, Jordan likes the over on this. And then I went and cross-referenced with the projections. And he actually projects for 130 yards as his median, 24 carries, 130 yards in my end. So I'm siding with you too, despite the sticker shock. Like, Texas is allowing over 200 rushing yards per game. And I like a lot of the backs you mentioned. You mentioned like Zach Evans, Abram Smith. Breece Hall was a first-team All-American last year. I think you could argue that he's the best back to have faced Texas yet. And I mean, the volume is going to be there, which I think is the most important thing. Like, he's handling over 60% of all of the rushing attempts on the team. And in college, this needs to be considered a little differently. 60 is a really high number because they include quarterback sacks in that number. So anytime you get a guy above 60%, that workload is just immense. And there's only a handful of backs seeing it in the entire country. They don't have a change of pace back. It is purely Breece Hall. And this Iowa State team wants to run the ball. Matchup, projection, everything aligns here.
Yeah, I mean, I was a little sticker shocked as well when I saw that his over-under was a 119. But when I went to pick it, like I was like, all right, let me look at Texas's defense. And I went through the game log. Like, that's one of my favorite things when deciding whether I want to be taking these props, because I know the talent of Breece Hall. I'm not really concerned with touches with him. And of course, this game is one of those that I'm excited to see because it's 2 teams that I actually like. I know Texas is not too good on the record column, but they've definitely one of the better teams in the country, and I'm excited to see where this goes.
Yeah, but it's not a blowout either. Like, the spread's within a touchdown, so that should mean Breece Hall's in the game for most of it at least.
Yeah, I mean, and I've seen Iowa State barely beat Northern Iowa, which is began the year, which was one of the crazier things that I've seen this year in college football. But you know, if you guys want some of the better projections in the business, we have our NFL Express DFS package weekly for $3.95 this week. It's low price and it has amazing tools. Our boom bust projection is one of the best out there. You can really decipher through your lineups, and you get to see the projections of Alex Baker, who's won a ton of money doing it. It's fantastic. You guys should definitely take advantage of this $3.95 offer this week. It's getting close to the end of the season, and this week for injuries and stuff, there's a lot of pieces you can take advantage of, which I know Matt will be taking advantage of as well.
For sure, man. Yeah.
But let's move on to another pick. One of the, disrespected teams in the country, Cincinnati. You like the over on Desmond Ridder's rushing prop.
All right, let's get the narrative out of the way first. Like, Cincinnati got a big slap in the face this week, left outside the top 4 despite their record. I think it's somewhat warranted. Like, Cincinnati hasn't beaten up the teams they need to, but also they've taken their foot off the gas in almost every single matchup. And I think it's to preserve the studs on their team. Like, they don't want Ridder out there playing in the fourth quarter against like some of these teams of Navy's caliber. So I know that Navy game was close. I'm just using them as an example. Same with like Jerome Ford and their studs. Like, they've been out of games early. So Cincinnati hasn't quite pulled away. I think that might change now after they just got slapped in the face by the playoff committee. So Ridder's basically been neutered for most of the year. He hasn't been playing full games, and his rushing yardage is way down from last year. He hasn't eclipsed 50 yards in a single game this year on the ground. Looking back last year when they were in more competitive spots, he was over that in 6 contests on the year, and his average was well above his prop. If you even like average the two, look to his career average in rushing, like he's way above 19.5 rushing yards. And I think now you might just have narrative working in his favor, where I assume their coaching staff is trying to use this as a motivational tactic. And I think they're probably going to try to have, like, they want to make the playoff, obviously. So they need to do a little bit more. I think they leave their studs in for these games a little bit longer and actually use their playmakers. So over on Ridder, 18.5 rushing yards for me.
Yeah, no, I actually agree with that. When I was looking through the props, I almost took Ridder in the rushing, but I wanted to have a receiving prop to end it. So I decided against it, but I agree. Cincinnati should come out and just utilize their athletes, because like, I don't think this is a year where they're going to go and win a national championship. Like, don't get it wrong. I think Georgia and Alabama and even Ohio State, I consider in the top echelon of college football right now. Michigan State, Ohio State is going to be a fun battle to end the year, but I think Ohio State and their receiver and running back room are just way too hard to, way too talented to get, defeated by the Oregon again, or another case like a Cincinnati. But Cincinnati should just get in. Let's see them play one of the big dogs. And I mean, Vegas already has these odds at like Alabama favored by 18 points and stuff. So like, if we're watching Alabama, Oregon, and Bama wins by 20, I don't really care. I would rather watch Cincinnati and Bama. And if they get beat by 30, they get beat by 30. It just happens.
Yeah, I mean, I don't care who plays. I just want to watch football either way. Put Cincinnati and put Oregon in. Like, I don't have a strong take. Notre Dame, they're my team. They're not going to get in. So as long as we can talk about the games and do props and DFS and all this stuff, like, put whoever in, I don't care. Put Coastal in.
Hey man, if they didn't lose, I would have been rooting for them as well. Let's get Coastal Cincy. It's
all right. Okay. I'm a UTSA fan now.
Stop picking. Just don't pick Alabama, so we won't lose. I just don't want. But you should pick Georgia, man. You should be a big Georgia fan.
I have futures on Georgia, so I am pulling for Georgia.
That's the way to do it. But moving along to one of the other props that I like, kid who's from South Florida, played at Deerfield Beach High School, Jaylan Knighton, running back for University of Miami. I like his over at 77.5 rushing yards. He's hit that in the last 3 games. He's one of those running backs that can break off a 70-yard run. He's been utilizing the passing game a lot. And with this Miami offense, like, we're not concerned with Derek King taking carries anymore, because Tyler Van Dyke is the quarterback and he has no mobility. And in this game, Miami's 10-point favorites. There's a 64-point over under. I like Knighton to be a big part of this rushing attack against Georgia Tech, and I see him getting in the 20 carry mark and getting over the 77.5 rushing yards.
I like that one too. He is very clearly the engine of this offense now. They just have so many injuries in their backfield, like Cameron Harris. They lost their, I forget the other second-year rusher they have, but they lost him this year too. This game's not on the slate, so forgive me. The name is escaping me, but he was a change of pace back early. Do you know what it is?
I do know. Oh, I'm going to look it up. You continue talking. I got it.
Yeah. So anyway, that's just evidence that Jaylan Knighton receives like all the workload in this backfield. So that's another one I'm definitely comfortable with. I think the over is a strong play there. He's still priced like he's in some sort of timeshare.
Donald Chaney. That's who it was.
Donald Chaney. Thank you, Jordan.
Yes. That is the running back that was there earlier. I mean, I'm from my brother's a huge Canes fan, so like I know a little bit about Miami football. But Jaylan Knighton isn't like actually just a good player. Like the moment he
He's a
stepped foot,
four-star. He's a four-star
yeah,
recruit.
yeah, no, he's one of the better running backs, and like I mean they just went and beat Pittsburgh last week. Like there's things that are doing well over there, and it's definitely a good spot. And speaking of Pittsburgh, one of the last props that I love, I said I was going to get a receiver prop in here. Jordan Addison over 101 receiving, 1.5 receiving yards. Addison is just a fantastic receiver, and he's been doing it all year long with Kenny Pickett. Pittsburgh just lost to Zaire Mack, I believe, for this week. They're banged up at multiple of the wide receiver position, and Addison has always been the lead dog. Duke is giving up over 295 yards per game through the air. And you look at some of like the premier receivers in the ACC. Josh Downs had 8 for 168 and a touchdown against them. Wicks had 7 for 125 and a touchdown against them. I know Addison may not stay in the game very long, but I think Pickett to Addison will be able to hit this over 101.5 receiving yards.
Yeah, Addison, he's just the pure alpha in this receiving core. Everything flows through him. And now you have some injuries working in his favor. This Pitt team plays really fast and they play up tempo. So they're always going to run a lot of plays. And even if they get up in games, sometimes their raw pass volume can just prop up some of these receivers because, they maybe they're running the ball a lot, but even so, like they just run so many raw plays that Addison and these receivers can still get there. So this is one I like too.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely an easy, this is one of those weeks where there's so many props that I was looking at throughout, and there's just rushing, receiving. There's a lot of really talented players in really talented spots. And one of the players that I actually was shocked to see that you got in here is tight end Brock Bowers for Georgia. Their offense is one of those offenses that I can't tell who's going to get the ball. I know Brock Bowers has been one of their bright spots on it, but the quarterback changing and all of this, how did you end up getting you got the under on Brock Bowers, so it's the good news.
Yeah, so we have an under. It's 62.5 receiving yards on Bowers. There's a lot of things I think that work against this receiving prop. First of all, they're playing Missouri as 40-point favorites. Now, Missouri's starting quarterback's out. So you have a situation where Georgia likely doesn't use their starters for the whole game. Even if they are like favored by 30 points here, I think they still don't use their starters, but it's a 40-point spread, which is ridiculous for two SEC opponents. And when the starters are in, you're now dealing with Georgia getting healthier on offense, which is great for their team, but it's not so good for like DFS and these props unless you're hitting unders. Brock Bowers, he hasn't seen more than 6 targets in any of his last 4 games. And that's just one lone game. He had 6 targets. In isolating his last 4 games, he's had 10 total targets, and 3 of those he's been at 2 or fewer. So he's very much less involved now that they got Darnell Washington back from injury, their former 5-star tight end freshman last year. They've been using a lot of Fitzpatrick. All their receivers are coming back, like Adonai Mitchell, Lad McConkey, Jermaine Burton, Kyrus Jackson. The list goes on. I won't name them all for you, but it's a crowded receiver core. And last week, Bowers didn't even hit 60% of the routes, which has been a trend down for him. It appears they prefer to use him in a timeshare. And then you project in sort of game script here against Missouri where the stars aren't running the whole time. He's not reaching 62 yards unless he just catches a long pass really early in the game. So I'm going under 62.5 receiving yards on Brock Bowers.
Yeah, no, I agree. I thought it said over. That's why I was talking it up. Like, at the end of the day, I was like shocked that we saw an over for Georgia, considering they're playing Missouri. I know this is the first week where I didn't pick the over and a rushing yard bet for Missouri or team that's playing Missouri, but it's simply because I don't think any running back's going to get more than 12 carries against them. And that's just not going to be enough for me to take Zamir White's over 99.5 rushing prop. But go looking at some of the extra picks we got here. I see that you like the stack of Sean Clifford to Jahan Dotson, which is the first stack in the week that we actually like.
And I like Raheem Jarrett on the run back. So 3 props towards the over here. I'll just kind of talk about this game a little bit because there's a lot of props that are underpriced here. First of all, the total sitting at 55.5, so it's a pretty healthy total. Penn State and Maryland are both above average in terms of pace, and Penn State is pretty far above average. Both these teams pass well above average. Penn State sitting at a 54.5% pass rate. Maryland sitting at a 56%. So right now we know both teams want to throw the ball. You look to Sean Clifford. He's been phenomenal this year, and then he got hurt in the Iowa game. The 2 games following that, you saw Sean Clifford, and his injury was a separated shoulder. So
Yeah.
Obviously, you would expect that to affect his throwing. I was very concerned about Clifford in the latter couple of weeks because of that. And then last week, we saw him come out and throw for 361 yards against Ohio State. So I think some of those injuries are behind him. Right now, he's priced as if he's still hurt. And this is an up-tempo pass-heavy spot on both sides. Clifford might just get there on pure volume alone. He's averaging 251 yards per game, and the opponent certainly doesn't scare you. That stems down to Jahan Dotson, who's also underpriced. Jahan Dotson is averaging 14.3 targets per game in Penn State's last 4 games. Now, again, part of that is because they've been down, but this game is fairly competitive against Maryland. It's only a 10-point spread overall. Dotson's going to get his regardless. The targets are there for him. He has a 34% target share. And then on the other side, Maryland, they're projected to trail in this game. They're already throwing the ball 56% of the time. A guy like Raheem Jarrett at his projection, as low as it is, his prop, this is a guy that is the clear number 1 receiver for this team right now. They lost Dante Demas. They lost Jayshon Jones. And I know like Carlos Carrier popped up for a huge game last week, but he was 3rd on the team in routes run in terms of receivers. It's still very clearly Jarrett in the lead. Jarrett had 8 targets in the last game. His prop being as low as it is, he's sitting at, let's see here, 54.5 receiving yards. That's something you could definitely look towards the over on. So this is a game I'm just a little more bullish on than the PrizePicks projections. I think the over on Sean Clifford, 224.5, Jahan Dotson, 83.5, and Raheem Jarrett, 54.5 are all live.
No, I do like that. Game stacking is always a fun one, especially where you just watch and just all of them hit. Hopefully it doesn't turn out the way that Penn State versus who was the team they played and went into 6 overtimes of Illinois.
Yeah, that was the game after Sean Clifford got hurt.
Yeah, that was no. I watched. No, I watched that game and I thought, you know what, I can get some leverage. I played a little bit of Sean Clifford. Then 5 minutes into the game, I'm like, this man can't walk. This dude looks like everything hurts. And that game ended up being one of the funnier games in college football, where they went 8 overtimes and they still needed 2 touchdowns to hit the over, I believe, for the total. But again, this has been a fantastic show. I know you got 2 more prize picks before we get going. You got Travis Dye over 74.5 rushing yards and Will Shipley over 77.5 rushing yards. Shipley's been one of the guys that I'm excited to watch. I'm just hoping Clemson continues to give him the ball 25 times a game, because that would be the best part. But Dye for Oregon, how are you approaching that? I know you have the over, but what do you like about Dye now that Verdell's gone?
Yeah, so Dye, he's a fantastic play, and I think people are concerned with the workload, and I'm not. He had an immense workload against Cal, then he had a huge workload against UCLA, and they played from behind in that game. So it wasn't like Dye was operating from positive game script, and he still got there. And last week they played Colorado. Like, that was a game they basically had taken care of from the outset. So they didn't need to use Dye in his normal bell cow workload. He's just not projected correctly, in my opinion, for a guy that's going to see a vast majority of the touches, especially on the ground. So that's why I like Dye. And Shipley, I think people are concerned with Kobe Pace clearing protocol. But even before the Kobe Pace game where he was out, last week Kobe Pace was out, so Shipley carried 25 times. Prior to injury, we saw Will Shipley handle 20-plus carries for this Clemson team as well. He's the number 1 running back recruit in the country, at least heading into this season. They clearly want to use him. And they're facing a Louisville defense, which has been bad all year. They are better against the run, but they're still allowing over 140 yards per game. And if Shipley's just the guy they're going to ride, his prop is also too low. So a couple overs I also like with Travis Dye and Will Shipley.
Yeah, no, I do like those. I remember Dye, once Verdell got taken out, he just was 30 touches a game this past week. And when I checked the Oregon box score, I was like, who is this guy? Who is this running back who led them in rushing yards? But I do think Dye will get majority of the workload as it continues forward. And over 74 is just it's a really low number for someone who's going to get a lot of touches. And again, thanks, Matt, as always. But just so you guys know, the prize pick promo we have going on right now, if you use code Awesemo, we'll match up to $100 in your first deposit. If you don't know what prize pick is, they offer a ton of player props, most in college football that I've ever seen. You pick over unders on them, and if you get safe, you pick 5 of them. If you get all 5 right, you 10x. If you get 4 out of 5 right, you 2x. 3 out of 5, you get 40% of your money back. That's fantastic. And be sure to subscribe and like to the show. And we have coming up next, we have NBA Deeper Dive at 5 p.m. and NBA Live Before Lock at 6. These are fantastic shows if you guys are playing NBA DFS. I found out before the show, Matt's a huge Jimmy Butler fan, so that's cool that we share that in common. And Matt will be even taking on some bets with the Bucks tonight. So again, guys, have a good one. I hope you enjoyed the show. If any questions you missed a prop, just reach out to Twitter. I'll be able to get you the information you need.